On this day in history, May 5th, 1260, Kublai Khan becomes ruler of the Mongol Empire. Included in the following is an excerpt from the 1944 edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica going over the history of the Great Khan. Kublai Khan, or Khan, as the supreme ruler descended from Genghis, was usually distinctively termed in the 13th century. Born 1216, died 1294. The most eminent of the successors of Genghis, Chinggis, and the founder of the Mongol dynasty in China. He was the second son of Telu, youngest of the 4 sons of Genghis, by his favorite wife. Genghis was succeeded in the khanship by his third son, Okadai, or Ogadai, 1229. He by his son, Koyok, 1246, and Koyok by Mangu, eldest son of Tule, part with his younger brother, Hulagu, afterwards conqueror of the Caliph and founder of the Mongol dynasty in Persia. In the last campaigns of Genghis, 1226-27, the Mongol poetical chronicler Sanang Setsen records a tradition that Genghis himself on his deathbed discerned young Kublai's promise and predicted his distinction. Northern China, Cathay as it was called, had been partially conquered by Genghis himself, and the conquest had been followed up till the Qin, or Golden Dynasty of Tartars, reigning at Kaofengfu on the Yellow River, was completely subjugated, 1234. But China, south of the Yangtze Kiang, remained many years later subject to the native dynasty of Song, reigning at the great city of Lingang, or Qinsai, now known as Hangzhou-fu. Operations to subdue this region had commenced in 1235, but languished till Mangu's ascension. Kublai was then named his brother's lieutenant in Cathay. The operations were resumed. By what seems a vast and risky strategy, the first campaign of Kublai was directed to the subjugation of the remote western province of Yunnan. After the capture of Talifu, Kublai returned north, leaving the war in Yunnan to a trusted general. Some years later, 1257, the Khan Mangu himself entered on a campaign in West China and died there, before Haochao in Szechuan, 1259. Kublai assumed the succession, but it was disputed by his brother Arkbuga and by his cousin Kaidao, and wars with these retarded the prosecution of the southern conquest. Doubtless, however, the fulfillment of this task was in the mind when he selected as the future capital of his empire the Chinese city now known as Peking. Here, in 1264, to the northeast of the old city, which under the name Yanqing had been an occasional residence of the Qin sovereigns, he founded his new capital, a great rectangular plot of 18 miles in circuit. The so-called Tartar city of modern Peking is the city of Kublai, with about 1/3 at the north cut off, but Kublai's walls are also on this retrenched portion still traceable. The new city, officially termed Taitu, Great Court, but also among the Mongols and Western peoples as Khan Balig, City of Khan, was finished in 1267. The next year, war against the Song Empire was resumed, but was long retarded by the strenuous defense of the twin cities of Xiangyang and Fenqing on opposite sides of the river Han, and commanding 2 great lines of approach to the basin of the Yangtze Kiang. The siege occupied nearly 5 years. After this Bayan, Kublai's best lieutenant, took command. In 1276, the Song capital surrendered, and Bayan rode into the city, then probably the greatest in the world, as its conqueror. The young emperor, with his mother, was sent prisoner to Khan Balig, but 2 younger princes had been dispatched to the south before the fall of the city, and these successfully were proclaimed emperor by the adherents of the native throne. An attempt to maintain their cause was made in Fukane, and afterwards in the province of Kwangtung, but in 1279 these efforts were finally extinguished. The conquest of southern China had occupied the Mongols during half a century of intermittent campaigns, but at last Kublai was ruler of all China, and probably the sovereign, at least nominally, of a greater population than had ever acknowledged one man's supremacy. For, though his rule was disputed by the princes of his house in Turkestan, it was acknowledged by those on the Volga, whose rule reached to the frontier of Poland, and by the family of his brother Hulagu, whose dominion extended from the Oxus to the Arabian desert. For the first time in history, the name and character of an emperor of China were familiar as far west as the Black Sea and not unknown in Europe. The Chinese seals which Kublai conferred on his kinsmen reigning at Tabriz are stamped upon their letters to the kings of France and survive in the archives of Paris. Adventurers from Turkestan, Persia, Armenia, Byzantium, even from Venice, served him as ministers, generals, governors, envoys, astronomers, or physicians. Soldiers from all Asia to the Caucasus fought his battles in the south of China. Once in his old age, 1287, Kublai was compelled to take the field in person against a serious revolt, raised by Nayan, a prince of his family who held a vast domain on the borders of Manchuria. Nayan was taken and executed. The revolt had been stirred up by Kaidu, who survived his imperial rival and died in 1301. Kublai himself died in 1294, at the age of 78. Though a great figure in Asiatic history, Kublai misses a record in the short list of the good rulers. He was the first of his race to rise above the innate barbarism of the Mongols, and he retained the force and warlike character of his ancestors. He had great intelligence and a keen desire for knowledge, with apparently a good deal of natural benevolence and magnanimity. But his love of splendor and his fruitless expeditions beyond sea created enormous demands for money, and he shut his eyes to the character and methods of his agents. A remarkable narrative of the oppression of one of these, Ahmed of Feneket, and of the revolt which they provoked, is given by Marco Polo, in substantial accordance with the Chinese annals. Kublai patronized Chinese literature and culture generally. The great astronomical instruments which he caused to be made were long preserved at Peking, but were carried off to Berlin in 1900. Though he put hardly any Chinese into the first ranks of his administration, he attached many to his confidence, and was personally popular among them. He made efforts to procure European priests for the instruction of his people, of which were known through Marco Polo. Failing this momentary effort, Kublai probably saw in the organized force of Tibetan Buddhism the readiest instrument in the civilization of his countrymen, and that system received his special countenance. Early in his reign he appointed a young lama of intelligence and learning, Bhante Duwaja, the head of the Lamite Church, and eventually also Prince of Tibet. The ecclesiastic was employed by Kublai to devise a special alphabet for use with the Mongol language. It was chiefly based on Tibetan forms of Nagari. Some coins and inscriptions in it are extant, but it soon perished. Of the splendor of his court and entertainments, of his palaces, summer and winter, of the great hunting expeditions, of his revenues and extraordinary paper currencies, of his elaborate system of posts and much else, an account is given in the books of Marco Polo, who passed many years in Kublai's service. His foreign expeditions were almost all disastrous. Nearly all rose out of a hankering for the nominal extension of his empire by claiming submission and tribute. Expeditions against Japan were several times repeated. The last, in 1281, on an immense scale, met with huge discomfiture. Kublai's preparations to avenge it were abandoned owing to the intense discontent which they created. In 1278 he made a claim of submission upon Champa, Cochin China. An attempt to invade the country through Tongking led to a war with that state, in which the Mongols had much the worst of it. A war with Burma, or Mien as the Chinese called it, were more favorable to Kublai's arms. The country was overrun as far as the Irrawaddy Delta, the ancient capital, Pagan, with its magnificent temples destroyed, and the old royal dynasty overthrown. The last attempt of the kind was against Java, and occurred in the last year of the old Khan's reign. The envoy whom he had commissioned to claim homage was sent back with ignominy. A great armament was equipped in the ports of Fukien to avenge this insult, but after some temporary success the force was compelled to re-embark with a loss of 3,000 men. The death of Kublai prevented further action. Some other expeditions in which force was not used gratified the Khan's vanity by bringing back professions of homage with presents, and with the curious reports of foreign countries in which Kublai delighted. Such expeditions extended to the states of southern India, to eastern Africa, and even to Madagascar. Of Kublai's 12 legitimate sons, Chinkim, the favorite and designated successor, died in 1284-85, and Timur, the son of Chinkim, took his place. No great king arose in the dynasty after Kublai. He had in all 9 successors of his house on the throne of Khan Balig, but the long and imbecile reign of the 9th Toghon Timur ended 1368 in disgrace and expulsion, and the native dynasty of Ming reigned in their stead.